Well, we're a
Hi,
few minutes early, so we'll give people a chance to join. How are you doing, Paula?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm a little frazzled. I'm between shows, so I had just got back from New York and I have one in Oregon this weekend.
Oh, wow. Busy.
Going a little frantically. But it should be good to get in and do a show again.
I'm sure.
You've been making any settings?
No, I'm watching. I'm
Okay.
learning, and I'm just trying to finish up a few things. Um, I have your class coming up,
Yep.
and I'm looking forward to that.
Good.
And I'm just finishing up some things that I did in a few other classes, but I'm
Right.
learning right now what's going on, and I'm watching the videos, your
Cool.
videos.
Cool. What classes have you taken lately?
I just finishing a ring with Rosie Revolver,
Nice. She does great.
Jessica, you know, the
Yep. Jessica Cote, yep.
yeah,
Oh, the saddle ring.
yeah, the saddle
Uh-huh.
ring. And I did the one before with the large bezel, the fancy bezel.
The decorative, adding that decorative wire around
Yeah.
and stuff. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does really good project-based stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I take
Nice.
my time and I do what I can do.
Good.
Yeah. So
Hi,
I'm just
Helen. Sorry, go ahead. No, I interrupted you, Paula. What were you going to say?
No, I'm saying I'm just learning and going at my own pace.
That's the way to do it. There's always
Yeah.
more to be learned. Doesn't
Yes.
matter how long you're at it.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun to learn new things and just different ways to do it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Helen, how about you? Have you been making any bezels?
I have. I've had the opportunity to try the marquee bezel like 6 times.
Nice. Marquee is one of my favorite cuts.
Every time I make a new mistake, but it's a good
Oh.
challenge, and it's so helpful to go back through and rewatch the videos. So
Good. Yeah. Are you doing method 1 or method 2? The 2-parter?
I've done both ways because I did the teardrop, the marquee, and the oval.
Nice.
And I've tried it both ways. The marquee I'm currently doing where you do the long strip with the shoulder bezel soldered on. So
yep. It really is a toss-up for me on whether that's better for the teardrop and the marquee.
Yeah, I'm still making up my mind as well.
Yeah, I sort of feel like teardrop, it can go either way. Marquee, it depends on how clean you can get your fit. And I think you get a better fit if you do the all-in-one, the strip. But it's a little harder to get perfect sizing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
But I could go either way on those. Still not locked in on the marquee. I mean, on the emerald cut.
I hope as we get started, you tell us how your show was this weekend.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. The Lyndhurst craft show, spring at Lyndhurst Mansion, which was absolutely the most perfect weather you could hope for, aside from a very windy setup day that made me glad I had rented a tent. Because man, the person next to me was doing wood and she had fairly heavy cutting boards and they were getting knocked over from the breeze, not from the breeze, but from like the movement against the tent from the wind as we were doing setup. So I was a little worried for her, but they were fairly durable. So she just tied them on tighter. But it was a lovely, lovely outing, and I love that show. As I've only attended as a guest prior to this, you know, as a visitor. It's a really beautifully curated show in New York, and the top of the chain of shows that particular group does. Oh my gosh, my cats have been fuzzing all over me since I got back, and so I have hair everywhere, including in my eyes. Oh my goodness, I have 2 long-haired kitties. And they have been insistent that they get petted every moment of the day since mom was gone. Yeah, so it was a nice show. When I'm judging a show for myself, I try to judge whether the audience is there for me or not. And in this case, the audience is definitely there for my price points. But I did not break even on this show because I was flying in and had to rent
Yeah.
the tent and so on. So there was a lot going on into my costs. But it's definitely one that I could see building for me over the 2 to 3 year mark, which is what I
That's
usually
great.
judge the show on. Yeah. And it's one of the better run ones out there. The art writer team is just amazing on how they've got it down to a science after all these years. So, yep. Sarah, I don't know if you're out there. You have anything to add on what you've been working on?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm on vacation this week, which is very
Nice.
So I'm trying to do a bunch of reticulated silver pieces with
Cool.
setting in them. So
Nice. Because your first show is coming up in
July.
July, right?
And I have
Nice.
the associated excitement and panic combo.
Yep. Chris, yeah, how about you? Have you been doing any stone setting or bezel making?
Getting ready. Had to get my certain equipment in my studio, but I'm hanging in there.
Nice. Nice.
Thank you so much.
Good. I spend a whole lot of time getting ready, it seems. I'm constantly getting ready for something.
Yep, same here.
Hey, Carmen, how about you? What are you up to? There you go.
Hey,
Got a new-
can you hear me?
Yep. And you got a
Okay.
new do. I like it. Got your
Okay.
hair trimmed.
Oh yeah, it's short.
I like it. What have you been up to?
Easier.
You been making anything?
Yeah, I made those bullets.
Oh yeah, the earrings that you posted that are spectacular.
Thanks.
Yay.
Yeah.
Great use of
And
bullets.
that, I think that, to be honest with you, that's mostly epoxy.
Well, John warned us that he epoxies the heck out of those, so they don't get water in them and stuff. But yeah, it takes some doing, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I had, a good thing is I had a bunch of little spring jump rings that I had already made. So that helped.
To find the
But my
perfect fit.
fingers, I don't know how you can do small work when your fingers get in the way.
Yeah, I have a hard time. And you saw how often I dropped stuff on that session. So it's
Mhm.
definitely a little more challenging, and it gets more challenging as I get older. My fingers are much less dexterous than they used to be. So we got to live with what we got to live with.
Mhm.
All right,
How
we'll
was
give
your show? You did your show, right?
I did do a show, and I have another one that I have to load in for tomorrow. Yeah, I was just saying that it was absolutely the most perfect weather, and it's a show that often is pouring rain apparently and muddy field. So we were all pleased to have really great weather. It was actually downright brisk the first day, and the winds died down thankfully after the first day. But great crowds. People are all really polite. It was a mix of masked and unmasked people. Sort of, I would say a little less than half were masked. It was an outdoor show, lots of space between everybody, so that wasn't as hard. People shop like crazy. There's a lot of regulars at that show who come back year after year. There are people been coming for 20 something years, both as artists and as attendees. And it's on it's on one of the most gorgeous estates ever, the Lyndhurst estate, which is a castle that's in the background, and it's on the lawns. And while the day before we got there, as we were doing our setup, basically the film crew was leaving, the film crew that was filming Gilded Age, the television show there. And I used to be in theater, so I know some of the indications of there having been a film crew there, and there's certain kinds of signage that goes up. So it was kind of a disconnect for me to see that world colliding with our craft world, but not being able to see all the filming. So the estate, normally the artists are allowed to do a tour of the estate on Saturday morning of the show, but because of the film crew, we weren't allowed to go in. So I found out from insider sources that it was actually Gilded Age that was recording there. So that was fun. And a really positive audience, lots of buying energy. it was one of the strangest buying audiences in terms of, I haven't been to a show where people wanted to pay cash in a very long time. So I wasn't prepared with enough change.
Oh,
But other than that, yeah, and, cash for large ticket items as well as small ticket items. So I was out of change quickly. But it was nice to see an array of people that really liked the art that they were looking at. It was very cool. It's not always the case that the audience understands and appreciates what goes into the work. And this audience clearly did. So
that's
yeah.
wonderful, because you have to pay a percentage in tax and a percentage in the credit card.
Yep.
So, it's nice that they are doing that, with the artists. That's wonderful.
The paying cash or the
Paying cash. And
oh, see, yeah, you still have to pay the tax no matter what. But yes,
yeah, I know, but then you don't have to do the credit card percentage.
right. Yes, it was definitely a savings on that front. But I'll be prepared for it if I get in again. I'm on wait list for their fall show, but it's a tight schedule, so I'm not sure even if I come off that, I would do it. But it's a beautiful show. Those of you that are on the East Coast who are looking for quality shows and haven't investigated the Art Rider shows, phenomenal production values. They do up and down Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York. Maybe they have a New Jersey show. Yeah, they do. They have the Morristown show in New Jersey. And some of the best run shows out there on the East Coast. So it looks like this may be our crew today. We'll stick with what we got, and people can join us as they want to, but welcome back. It feels like it's been weeks and weeks and not just 2 weeks. Was it just 2 weeks, or did we have a 3-weeker? So I have been crazy busy with the show and with traveling. I was in Boston and Connecticut and New York in the last 10 days.
Wow.
So I got back Monday night, I think, Monday night. It's been a blur since then. But what that means is that I'm only partially as well prepared as I would like to be for this session. So I don't have all my last session pieces nicely mapped out, but I am going to zoom on
Don't
this
forget
one.
to pin yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I always forget that at the start of the session. Spotlight for everyone. Okay, so what I want to do is show the results of last sessions, plus a little bit extra that I did while I was in betweens. So we had done the 2 different types of capped bezels, which are especially useful for the bullets. We did the one where there's a ring inset that it rests on.
Yeah.
And because I don't have a whole lot of bullets, I did the same stone for both, so that's one version that it'll be set into. And we'll choose which one to set it into. And then we did the version where you're basically making a bezel wall and setting that into the cap. It's a snugger fit. There we go. Slightly different looks from the same basic concept of setting the stone. Both of them can be hanging. They don't have to be hanging. You could, I suppose, set them sticking up out of something, but the little ring might catch some water. Or other junk in it. So those are usually done as a dangle off the end. You see this kind of setting a lot in Asian jewelry of various sorts. And just so you can see it in a longer look, this is the same walled setting, just with a longer piece. Same basic concept. We talked about being able to use decorative materials if you can get your doming done without destroying it too much. And folks had ideas on that, putting down some kind of material before you dome. We also did a tongue setting. And this was the one that, to me, looks a little bit too much like a hat, so I would probably trim it back. So I did another one that shows it what its trimmed back version looks like. This one, it has a bit of a pattern on the wire. So if I were to blacken this, it might pop nicely against the white of this stone. And then I just trimmed my cap, even though it's still got a curve in it, like the larger one does. It's just a bit of a curve, and then it trims back to just barely hanging over the edge, but you could trim it all the way back. So again, another nice decorative element. And this one fought a little bit because the stone isn't nice and perfectly symmetrical, so I had to make sure it fit in the one direction that it's going to go in. If I set it back this way, it's a much looser setting. So each one has its directionality. And then the very first one we did, I did these in reverse order, I think. The very first one we did was for a conical setting where we had to cut away material. And there's lots of versions of the cutaway that John showed in the book. Could be just an arch that's carved out. In this case, we did sort of a petal shape. And I think looking at how it fits in here, I'd probably want to trim it down a little bit because that hides an awful lot of the stone. So I may want to trim these back a little shorter before I finish setting it. If I were hanging this one, I would also put some kind of connector up there. But that's because the cone is so steeply shaped, we need to have some cutaway to be able to push it down. We can't simply make a walled bezel and squish it enough to hold the stone in. So those were the ones we did last time. Any questions on those?
I do. I mean, I had a hard time trying to figure out the hat part. I did
Figure
it
out the which
once,
part?
the hat part.
Yes. On the
Yeah, I
tongue?
did. Yeah, not the tongue. I don't have a tongue, just for the
Okay.
bullet.
Okay.
Like I measured it according to the book, and when I put it on, it just didn't feel right. So
Too
I ended
large?
up too big.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I miscalculated, but then I ended up, I'm just gonna do another one. And then when I
Yeah.
did the other one, it was so much better. It was
Good.
so much better, smaller.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the overhang, and he didn't really give us a whole lot to go on his principles for how big we should make it. The oval is sort of guided by the width of your stone if you're doing a tongue. But these, it's really how little can you get away with, as long as you're doing the walled version. If you're doing the ring, yes, I think I too found that it tended to be bigger the way he described it than I wanted it to be. So yeah, trimming it back. When I was done, I wanted just barely hanging over. So I don't know if that shows, but that whole 2 millimeters in, I think he may have been working, when he designed his measurements, he may have been working with larger bullets than what I've been working with. And the proportions are just not scaled well. But yeah, use your gut. It's about, do you have enough material to hold the piece in? And again, we're going to be using the epoxy, so that'll help. But I need it to be snug enough that when I push the material in, it's actually, the metal is pushing against the stone high enough up that it's going to hold it, be part of the holding process at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anybody else have any discoveries or questions? All right, so that's last round. I'll get those put on the board before next time. And we're going to do setting hopefully next session. So we'll see some or all of those set. Today we are starting on page 81 of the book at the bottom, reverse settings. And in going through this to prep, what I realized is that John describes something in pictures at the top that he doesn't go into a heck of a lot of detail. So sorry, at the top of page 82. So he's giving us a lead in to explain reverse settings. And then on 82, he starts some drawings that he never really goes into details in the book. So I took those apart a little bit, and we're going to try one of those. I'm calling it a reverse conical collar. And one of the things that is interesting about it is that it has a taper. And in this chapter, he doesn't talk a whole lot about tapering. In a later chapter, we get to learn about tapering. But I pulled out my, my bezel block so that we can at least play a little bit and do some taper work on this first one. Because basically what you're doing is you're making a reverse of the cone. It has to follow the cone that we're setting it into. And so we're going to use the taper to get us something that matches the taper of our stone, right? And in looking through it, I have a suspicion that his measurements, they assume certain things. So he's talking about what's confusing is in the section of text below the images there, he's talking about the below setting where we're making a collar that is holding it by dint of how we've filed. And in that one, he talks about needing to make the inner ring just the size of the stone. But in the drawings up top, there's a little bit of a difference there. It looks like it's more about making something that is taller than the stone. So it ends up conically, it's wider at the top than the stone because we need enough room for it to come over and fold. Because we're going to put a little cap underneath, and basically the cap is what we're bezel setting. The stone just happens to be a support for it by the time we're done with this first image. So this one I would suggest taking some notes on as you go, because it isn't really well documented, and I'm going to be doing my translation of what I think he wants us to do in those drawings. Let me draw a little bit. So the first thing that I'm going to do in doing this is I'm going to make a standard walled bezel that wraps around the outside of my cone. So if my cone is this big, this is a really, really faint pen. Oh, I'm not showing you my screen. That would help too. Hang on a sec. Better pen. Get the glare off. Oy. It's really awful today. Did I set my settings? I think that's about as good as we're getting today. So we're going to first start by making a straight up and down cone as if we were starting the conical setting that we did before, right? But it's got to be a snug one, because ultimately, when we set this cone upside down in it, the max width needs to hold that in place, and it needs to stick a little bit above the stone, right? Because what's going to happen is we're going to put a cap inside. Let me do this in two colors because this really just looks like a mess right now. We're going to put a cap, a disc, inside and use the overhang from this to set it, right? So the tube that we're making is really going to be this. The stone has to slide past, but we ultimately are going to be compressing it down to an angle. And therefore, because putting it into the bezel block is going to try and stretch it while also trying to compress it. I want to make this snug to start with because it's easier to size it up than it is to size it down. So first attempt, we're going to start by making a fairly light gauge. In this case, I'm using 22 gauge ring that is going to be hanging over the stone enough to hold it in place. So I'm going to sort of, a millimeter or two over the stone, plus a little bit more, because that's what I'm going to fold down over the cap. Let me draw that one because that's such a tiny stone that it's a little hard to see. So if this is my stone, I'm making a cap that is this is going to rest in, and that's going to give me excess to go over the top. Okay. So this is my overhang that will be folded down. I can always cut more of this away afterwards. But I'm going to try making this. Let's see what I think is a good measurement on this. I'm going to try to do, see if my tools are ready. I'm going to go, looks like about a centimeter. So that'll give me, splitting the difference between the height that I want the stone being supported and the fold over material that I want. And that just happens to be where I put it on this. If I had a taller cone, I might make it a little longer. If I had a steeper cone, I might make it a little shorter. It's going to depend, and you're going to have to use your gut on this one. So as with all the others, I'm starting out with making a strip. Just going to blacken so that I can see my strip. And again, in this case, I'm using 22 gauge because I know I don't want to have too much material to push over. In this first drawing, what he's doing is having us use such a thin amount of metal that we can actually push the whole thing down. But remember that compressing over something like that so that it's almost folded on top, you know, like 90 degrees is very, very challenging, which is why in later style back settings, he has us potentially cutting material away, just like we did on the not reverse bezel set conical that we did last time. So just cutting out a strip. And then I'm gonna straighten it out a bit and make something that will curve around the base fairly snugly. Just gonna make it around, except that I cut the end very badly, so let me trim back a little bit. Get a little more even.
I have a question about a
Sure.
tool.
Yep,
Have you ever considered the nano tool?
the nano tool that Pepe makes.
Yeah, because I'm looking at you doing that and it does little rings like that.
I would love to add the nano to my existing Pepe ring bender. The price is a little beyond me right now. I couldn't justify spending that much yet. But this weekend at the show I'm going to, a representative of Pepe is going to be there, and maybe he'll have one for me to look at up close and drool all over. But yes, absolutely great tool if you have it available to you. So again, I want to go a little bit on the snug side. The other thing is that this kind of back setting, with a little more practice, you can actually set some non-standard shapes. If you think about it, we're just making a standard bezel wall, but we're making it with overhang, and we're going to then put a plate in from behind against which the stone rests. It's just a little trickier to angle the angle the walls. So you may be able to do some manual manipulation, stretching and sizing it. The next setting where we do a full.
Rachel, could you move it up a little bit? There we go. Thanks.
Yep, sorry. It's my bad eyesight making me pinch things close. Okay, so all I'm going to do is solder this together, and then I'm going to round it properly. I love back setting faceted stones. In all these ones that we're doing right now, they're pretty much tabs that he's using in his drawings and so on, but there's nothing that says you couldn't, if you have a high backed round or something like that, faceted rounds, it's a great setting to get from the back, because then you get this beautiful point showing. Or especially if you have a badly cut stone where it's got a very, very big belly, then the belly becomes more of the prominent part of the stone. Hold on a sec, my torch does not want to light for the first time today. Come on, there we go. So I'm just doing a quick solder. Remember, as always with silver, if you heat from the back instead of at your seam at first, it'll help press that seam closed. Just doing a quick connection. There we go. Popping back over. Round this up on a mandrel. Small of a mandrel. Okay, so this is ever so slightly too small. Definitely need to go up to the next size mandrel to get it a little more round.
Rachel, you're out of.
Oops, I'm on the wrong
camera.
bench, aren't I? Sorry about that. Sitting here hammering away for you guys. So all I'm doing is rounding it a bit. And as I mentioned on the last session, when I want to get something a tiny bit sized up, I'll put it against a steel bench plate. Just remember that you want to reverse it and do the same thing from both directions. Although in this case, ultimately, we're trying to get a piece that is a little bit tapered. So we might not have to do that reverse as much if we're already in the tapering mode. All right, so this barely doesn't fit. It's a little too snug. And I'm going to clean up on the sandpaper wall, the little grid that we made in our very first session, to get a nice clean edge. Any water left in my water bin. And I try to remember to rotate my piece occasionally when I'm sanding flat, because I never actually sand as consistently as I should, meaning my hands are pressing down more one way or the other. So if I'm just going back and forth, I'm more likely to file it or sand it unevenly. So I tend to go what I call crazy legs all over the place and rotating the piece periodically. And at this point, all I'm looking for is a nice, even, level surface on both sides before I start to dome it in. If you have trouble getting it nice and even with your sanding, remember you can always use the trick where you put a marker, a Sharpie mark on it, and then sand it down. And when you check, if you still have Sharpie marker anywhere, that's the part that is highest. So it needs to go until you get rid of that little bit of marker. We're looking pretty good there. Use a little bit more. Good. All right. So I've now got a cleaned up piece. I'm probably going to want to, before I dap it in, I'm going to want to take a file to the insides a little bit. My favorite, again, on these is the crossing file. If I can find my crossing file. I brought a whole bunch of stuff with me and moved everything around for my travels. So give me a sec. That looks, nope, that's a round file. Where did I put my crossing files? Oh, I took one out already. Okay, so a crossing file on insides of curves is nice because it has two separate curvatures on it. So you can get most good angles that you need to. You could also use the pipe reamer that gets the inside cleaned up a little bit. All I'm doing is deburring it, basically. I don't want any extra junk in there when I'm about to push it down into a taper, because that metal will just get jammed up. Right, and I'll take a sweep around the outside with either a flat file or a barrette file for the same reason, just to get any chatter off of the outside of my metal on both edges. One. All right, so now I've got this little conical, perfectly upright cone that just barely doesn't fit. It's a little too snug for my piece. And I'm going to start looking for a place that's similar in size to it. And I'm going to put a little wax on my piece just because I know that I have a tendency to get things jammed up when I use one of these. So I just put Burr Life on it. And this is a gentle tapping with my punch, which I managed to put down. Where did I put my punch down? Give me a second. Buckets. No. I just had it because I showed it to you guys.
So what do you call that tool?
This is called a bezel block, or a
Bezel
bezel,
block.
or a punch block, bezel punch. And it has, and they come in different shapes, and they're ridiculously expensive, or I would have one for every shape stone on the planet. But starting with the round is really nice. And I'm just going to put my stone, my ring in one of the slightly larger than the outer edge of the block loops. Put this in here and just gently start tapping it around. And it'll start to use the block to taper, but it'll also be pushing up against the punch. I may need to go a little bit more consequentially than using my mallet. Long time since I used one of these. Need to be a little bit more serious about it. Okay, so just that little bit, and you can see how much it's already started to taper. So you want to check this, because what we're looking for is a taper that fits the stone, right? And that is enough to give us room for our cap to go in. So right now, I don't have enough lip to push over once I make a cap for it. So I need to stretch it a little bit more than I already have. Pop it back into that same hole, see if I can get any more out of that. Because it's quite close. All right. So now we have the right taper, which is great. But I'm not sure, I'm still not sure there's enough. Now, this stone is perfect because I happen to have a piece punched that is not quite the right size, maybe the right size. Yeah, it is. It's the right size because it fits over the stone, but now I'm at too wide of a taper at the top. So I need to get this crunched back in a little bit. So let's see if I can pull this off by very, very gently upside down, trying to push it back down in the next hole up to get my taper to close up a little bit. What I'm looking for is a snug fit around the stone. And then when I put my cap in, I need enough material to fold over. And we're a little bit loose and not very round on this. So I've got to true it up a little bit. Do it in a smaller hole, in a bigger hole rather. And I may need to actually redo this and start it as a smaller ring even than I did. I thought I was making it snug enough. Because what I'm seeing, it's not too bad down on the bottom. What I'm seeing is I'm not getting deep enough into the piece. Whoop. Can you guys still see me?
Yes.
Okay, my camera system just rebooted on me, so give me a minute. There we go. We're still seeing the right one. And my face is up there for you guys, yes?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
the bolt in the block. Okay, good. Good, good. I just decided to have a little holiday for a moment. So I'm still needing to get this deeper in than I have it, which means ultimately I need to stretch the bottom of the taper more. So I'm going to pop it back into that larger hole and try to squeeze it further down. And you can, theoretically, you can get this kind of a taper by manual manipulation of the metal with a pair of pliers. But you can also, instead of forcing it into this curve, you could do what we're going to learn in one of our later settings later today. You could make a cone that is the right taper. Yeah, I think the trick is that either I still need to get it a bigger hole at the bottom, or I need to have a taller starting bezel. Let's see if I can keep stretching this a little bit further. One bigger. It's a delicate balance between stretching the top too much and getting the height you need. Super, super close. I want a little bit more of a lip. Actually want the top to be a little snugger, so try this.
And Rachel,
Yep.
be sure to emphasize that those bezel blocks should be the ones purchased from Italy.
Oh, okay. Have you used that
Because-
one?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen good ones and bad ones, and the big trick is that if you get one of the bad ones, you can blunt. What you do is you take the it's not so much of a problem on the round ones, but on the other side shapes that have a corner, the blunted, you need to blunt whatever the device is that you're putting into it, because they're often so sharp that they cut into the material. So if you put it on your polishing wheel with some Tripoli or another cutting compound, you can often clean that up enough to make them more functional. But yes,
Yep.
true
That's
test.
good to know.
Yeah, it's one of the big problems with them is that they're often cut badly. And of course, when you get a shape like for making an emerald cut or something, that only fits one proportion of emerald cut. It's if you have a not well cut stone or a fatter cut of a stone, it's not going to do you much good. Let's see, what do I want to do with this? I want to still stretch this a little bit more, but I think I'm going to pop it on my bezel mandrel to try and get the base a little bit wider. So the smaller end a little bit wider. And I'm going to do that just by trying to force it down the mandrel. Just to stretch the bottom a little bit more than the top. In this cone, I'm sort of at the mercy of the angle of it. I can do a little more manipulation if I'm on the mandrel. That got me a little more leeway.
Yeah, I was wondering about the bezel, the mandrel. Is
Yeah,
it possible to do it on a mandrel?
it
think
would
a
be
little one?
possible. Yeah, if you're careful about it and you really can stretch your metal evenly, you could work up a mandrel. It's the same problem that we're having here, is that my cone has a slightly steeper taper than the device. So I have probably 6 different round mandrels, all with slightly different angles or different tapers. And I would play between them, find the one that closely matches your stone. We're getting there. But yeah, absolutely. And again, you can also create a cone out of metal, the way that we're going to on our teardrop set, on our briolette setting today. Let me try and get this a little bit more open at the bottom. And to do that, I'm going to do it this way. Tapers always add a bit of complexity because, again, they have to follow whatever stone you're trying to match it to. We're getting there, but now I need to go back to the tapering device and get it a little evened out. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. That looks a lot better. So what I'm looking for is, do I have enough lip to fold over? And I'm seeing that I do, but I think in looking at this that I'm going to need a bigger disc than I've got. I chose my disc based on his description of having a cap that is basically the size of the stone's base, which this is. But I think that's going to make it hard. If I don't have it ever so slightly bigger, it's going to make it hard to get it a snug fit. So what I've got now is a decent fit from this side when it's pushed in. And a little bit of a lip, but maybe not enough yet. Again, I'm looking for how much I'll be able to fold it over. Maybe that's enough. I think I want to try for a smidge more. Oop, I'm not, am I showing you the right screen? I am showing you the right screen. Good. So once again, to try and widen the base, I'm trying to force it through here. I could also potentially, if my mandrel's not going to fit through there. If you have something that you can push it against all in one, so it's round instead of pushing a side at a time, it'll be even more effective. If you've got a wide draw plate of some kind that this would fit through, that would do the trick. Then instead of doing a side at a time as I size, I'm sort of hitting all of it at once, which is going to give a better spread. Okay, so now I've got, once the piece is in place, I've got about 0.5 millimeter of metal showing above it. I think that's going to be pushing it, but let me see what happens when I tighten up the cone again. So I think that's going to give me enough. What I'm not certain of is whether my taper is going to cut it. Because I think it may be a little bit loose along the front. Yeah, in fact, it's a lot loose along the front at this point. So let's see what I can do about that. Okay. I'm happier about where it hits the front now. It's fairly snug in there. And that gives me a little bit more leeway, almost a millimeter hanging over the top. What I'm not happy about is, again, the taper is wider at the top than I really want it to be. And I don't know whether I'm going to be able to push in far enough, whether the metal will move far enough to close that in. So I have two choices. I can keep working to try and close the top of the bezel in a little bit more, or I can use a larger disc. If I use the larger disc, my fear is that this is going to float around a little bit inside, that it's going to want to wobble. So I think I'm going to give it a moment more of trying to compress in the top a little bit. And for that, I'm going to go into a bigger setting space upside down. Just try to encourage it closed a bit. Better, but still not as close as I'd like. So let me try that a little bit steeper. And in order to get, if I can't hit it directly on top of this, I can instead grab a punch or something like it that fits inside the space enough that I can use it upside down to give myself something to tap against to snug things back in. In a little bit. Okay, we're getting closer. One more pass like that might do the trick. Okay. I don't know if these tiny little adjustments I'm making are showing to you guys, but I'm getting less and less rim showing around what is going to be my cap. And that's what I'm going for, is I want a nice close fit, because then we're just going to burnish over the rest of the material. Now, one thing that his drawings sort of imply that you could also use a rounded cap if you wanted. The goal being that that rounded cap still has to be a snug fit inside. Yeah, I'm feeling like we're on the right track, because I'm almost up to the cap width. And I have a good support down in the stone setting.
That's getting closer.
It's getting closer, little bits, little adjustments. A lot of the stone setting stuff is about tiny, tiny adjustments. All right, now my cap, if you can see it, fits really snugly inside there. And so I have just a fingernail's width of material hanging above the cap. And when it gets set in firmly, that'll be even more material pushed in there. So I think we have a good winning combination to push that over. I'm now going to take my cap and make a little half loop on the top so that I have something to hang it from. And since it's flat at this point, again, we could have done this domed, but for this, I happen to have the perfect flat disc for this, so I figured I'd roll with it. But I'm just going to use a half jump ring, which I have plenty of cut, I believe. Let me see. And I'm going to just put one in the center. If you want, you can mark it. I'm lazy and usually eyeball these.
Even when I mark it, I still get it wrong.
Right. That's part of the reason that I eyeball. And I'm just using a double bead, one for each side of the setting. Of the connector, rather. Yeah, it's fairly well centered. Clench it. All right, so what we now have are the essential parts of a reverse setting. Let me pop back to the other screen. Actually, I'm going to show this to you up close on the good camera so that you can see the pieces that we're talking about, because it'll show a little better. Right into camera. There we go. Okay, so we have a conical piece that follows the taper of the stone well enough that we have a snug fit. I'd like it ever so slightly snugger than that, but that's, I think, as good as I'm getting with the tapering tools I have. So the stone fits in from behind, basically from behind, leaving a little bit of excess up top, so that when we put the cap in place, we're going to be able to burnish the upper lip right there down over the cap. And voila, we've got a little stone setting. Questions?
No. Good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep, pretty neat little setting. And again, you can do decorative on the outside. You can actually do a fair amount of decorative on here. I would say we're going to need to leave a little bit of leeway down at the base, so that if we do need to snug it in, we can. And this one probably is another candidate for a drop of John's favorite epoxy when we're setting it. I might even epoxy the cap directly onto the stone so that it's perfectly positioned. But I could see putting some decorative wires around and so on, just about anything that you wanted to do on the outside, or doing a pattern sheet on the top and or the sides. What you have to remember is that this is going to need to be set before, well, mostly before you solder anything in place. You might be able to do this by soldering the cap onto whatever you're setting it on, and then very carefully setting whatever it's hanging from, but it'd be a little tricky to get your burnisher in to position once that's soldered into place. So the assumption is that there's not going to be more soldering once that stone is set. Okay, questions about that?
Rachel, when you use the bezel block, do you ever need to anneal the metal?
Yeah, it's a good call. This was a piece because I had just soldered it together. It was already annealed. But yeah, absolutely. If I were tapping too much longer, I probably would have wanted to switch over and anneal. I could have annealed during that process, but the problem was not the stretch of the metal. It was the shape of the angle that I was hitting. So you can see that I ended up with something that sort of curves back a little bit. It's not perfectly angled like that, but rather it has a little bit of a curve at the top. I just didn't have my bezel block is not the exact same angle as this stone. So yeah, absolutely. If you work it much longer than I did, by all means, go back and anneal again. Other questions?
Yeah, so is it possible if you don't get the curvature on the top to just solder it?
If you don't get the curvature on the top, to just
Well,
solder
you're
it.
going to, you said you're going to use it. You said you were going to
Burnish it
bezel
down.
Yeah. You're gonna
Yeah,
burnish it on the top of the circle.
I'm going to
to
burnish the
snug it.
lip down over the
Yeah.
top. Yep. So
So-
you can't really solder it in place because the stone will be there and you'll crack the stone.
Oh, you're
right?
doing it with the stone in. Okay.
Right, you have to, because that's what the stone is already, the whole point of a reverse one is that the stone is set up into your setting. So the only way to keep it in place is to do stuff over it. So that's the one really big downside of back setting. But the next setting that we're going to do from John's series here is going to show us how he designs his piece with that setting in mind. So you're building it into your plate. This one
Rachel?
is not. Yep.
Remind me what the measurement on that lip is.
So I'm going with just barely enough. So this is one that I got to say, he didn't give us enough information. So I am
Yeah.
going based off of his drawing, where you can see on part 2 and 3, where he's pushing it down and then smoothing the edges, that it needs to just barely be enough to go over the top lip. So I've left myself, like, by the time I'm set in place and it's firmly down on the stone, I've left myself like not even a half a millimeter, because I'm assuming he's literally telling us to burnish it with a metal burnisher. That will prove out or not when we get to the setting next session. It may be that I've got it too short. So worst case is make it too big, too tall, and you can always file that part back down. But in my case, I've tried to make it so that I'm just literally enough that when I burnish it down, it's going to hang over the way his drawing shows.
Yeah, it looks mighty thin.
It is mighty thin. Yeah, but looking at that picture, John is really, when his drawings are more articulate sometimes than his words. I mean, that sounds bad. Sometimes he is able to describe something in an image in ways that the words are not describing. And so I'm basing this really on just how thin that images 2 and 3 look in pushing it over the surface, that he's barely hanging on to it. And again, this feels like one that he would probably recommend a drop of the epoxy. And I think I will probably be putting that on the inside of the lid. What'll be interesting to me is I probably will make another one of these on my own time, where I have tried the domed version of the cap, because I have a sneaking suspicion that may be easier to burnish over than the flat caps, because it'll follow the angle of the burnish. Does that make sense? So I'll probably make us at least one more example of this. More questions?
Thank you.
Sure.
Can you make one without putting the cap on it?
What do you mean?
Well, just have the bezel and then have, I don't know, some kind of big jump ring that spans the width of the bezel to hang the pendant from, so it's open at the top.
So the problem is your stone will wobble, a little bounce,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So
okay.
but the next one we're about to do answers that if you want to have an open top, because what he's doing is making a little ring that it acts as the donut that holds everything into place,
Oh,
right? So,
okay.
So there are ways to make it more open than the capped version for sure. And frankly, I don't know if he goes into, he doesn't really talk about any other kind of back setting, but the first back setting I ever did was possibly even, despite my hatred of them, an emerald cut. Basically any of the step bezels that we learned at the very beginning of the chapter, where we're building that inner wall, you can do a reverse setting with that. You just have to give yourself thin enough metal that you can really make all of your folds over the step bezel, and you make the height of your inside wall really, really short, because then it's all the material that's sticking up beyond it. So let me draw that one because my hands are not doing the trick for that, that description.
Yeah, that sort of is hurting my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me draw this one, because this is one of my favorites, is this kind of reverse setting. So let's take a basic teardrop stone that we've got, or pear setting, right? And let's say it's a faceted one. Normally, we're used to setting it this side up with the belly of it down
Rachel,
below, right?
you're not in camera.
Thank you. Wrong one. So we have our basic teardrop, a basic pear setting, right? And normally what we would be doing is building this in our step bezel, right? All the way around, something for it to rest on. Get another pen color that works better. So our inner wall is just below. And we have that rule that we're going to hide the belly because we don't want it bumping the skin, right? So this is what we're making when we make a traditional bezel. But if we're doing it upside down, what we can do is something of the reverse of that. Instead of making a tall wall in the inside wall, we make a very short wall, knowing that that means that our stone will be sticking out from above. And we're going to actually set it this way so that, oh, this purple pen is shot. Hang on. So that when our stone is set from behind, which it will still be as if we had done the setting the normal way, but these walls are just going high enough to hold it in place so that nothing here hangs over, but we let this intentionally hang over. So our inner wall is just enough to support it, and the rest sticks out the back. If you have a round faceted stone, what that looks like is this basically, right? So we've built our wall, and our inside wall is just enough to hold it in place. Okay, but this then becomes the setting, holding what is normally the table and leaves the coulette pointing up. So this is a step bezel that we've just made the proportions the opposite of what we do when we're trying to hide the coulette. And then we solder this in place somewhere so that we can set it from behind. So the setting goes against our plate there, leaving this to be set.
So so the coulette is actually the part that you see,
Right.
whereas normally that would be flipped.
Right. Yeah, now you don't want it on like the top of a ring, because if somebody
Yeah.
hits against something, it's gonna go bang, but like for pendants and stuff, it's gorgeous. And sometimes, especially on badly cut stones, there's a lot more material at the coulette than there is at the table. And it's a like, they left it so that they can get the weight when they charge you by the gram, right? So let me see if I have a faceted stone that this would be a good example on. So here's a pair that we've done the traditional way, right, with our coulette hidden, but we could just as easily have it showing that way, and it becomes, in this case, kind of a rose cut, just a very well cut rose cut. But we can also, if I had made this a whole lot shorter and set it the normal way, but cut my wall down so low that it was set from behind, what I would have is a little lip around the edge of my stone, and then the back of the stone would become the presenting side, right? I'd still be setting it from here. So the trick when you're doing back setting is that you need to be able to have access to that on the back of your piece. You need to be able to set it after you've done all of your other soldering in place. So you're kind of soldering it upside down. I will try to, I have at least one piece still in inventory that I can pull out that'll show you guys what that looks like. And I'll try to remember to do that for next time, because this is a fun way of thinking about it, is can we use the same mechanism reversed just by trimming our proportions differently, right? And therefore, setting from behind gives you the option, anything that you can currently set as a faceted stone, you can set from behind just by reversing those proportions.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it gives you a whole bunch of different looks, especially when you get to unusually cut stones, because then you can take in all of those cool angles that the stone cutter has left to get that shape. So while we're doing this specific reverse setting for the conical shape, just keep in mind that it's not the only way to set from behind. And we're about to build a piece that is basically building the bezel in reverse. In this case, we're going to be building it with an angle into it. So this works. The next setting that we're doing is another tongue setting. It's essentially the elements I just described. It's just made much shorter for the sake of the angle of the conical setting. Any other questions before we jump into that one? Okay, if you are playing along at home, we are now at the text portion of page 82 in the book. And there's a couple of notes I want to give you, because this one I had to mark the heck out of as I was reading through it. So the first thing that you need to understand about this next design is that it assumes there is a back plate that's really the top plate, or whatever you're putting your stone set up into. Okay, so you think about this in the context of a pendant, or sheet metal of some kind, or a curved piece if you're setting it behind a piece of curved metal, but there's some kind of topper through which the stone is bursting. And that's not entirely clear the way he's described that. You can do the first half of what he's designing without necessarily, like if you just wanted a back hanging pendant and you just wanted a jump ring on it, you wouldn't need the topper plate. But the measurements he's described here, I believe, are counting on that plate being there. So you're going to have to actually make your the middle wall, the angled inside wall, a little bit smaller if you're not putting this against a back plate. He's counting on the thickness of that that sheet that is normally the bottom, but now we're going to be pushing our stone through. He's counting on that thickness as part of the angle that he describes us building in his measurements. As he talks about, so there's three parts to this, the way he's described it. One is the outer ring, which is our normal wall that we would make for any standard step bezel. So outer wall. Then there's the inner ring that we're going to be filing down at the angle that the stone is coming through the, like exploding, think of it as the volcano. It's coming up the angle of the volcano. So that's part 2. And then part 3 is whatever it's exploding through, which normally, if we were setting the other way, would be the bottom plate, right? In this case, it's the top plate and it's the continuation of the volcano support. So if we're making something without that back plate, our volcano support has to be a little closer in so that it's holding the stone, because he's counting on that last piece of the metal to hold the stone in place. Hopefully that'll make sense as we go through it. But that was one of my first notes, is just be aware that that the measurements are assuming you're bursting through some sheet. And the angle is going to be the tricky part, and he sort of implies it here, but we're going to test this out while I do it. He implies that you need to actually get the angle of part 2, that inner ring, filed before you set it in, but he doesn't explicitly say it. Some of his descriptions in the drawings imply it. So what we're going to be doing is making our outer wall, our inner ring separately that fits snugly in. We're then going to angle file it. Then we solder it into place. Make sure our angles work with the angle of the stone still, because they need to continue that curve so that the stone is bursting through it from behind. And then we're going to put our back plate on and continue to cut the angle that we need. So basically step 1 will be the outer wall. Step 2 will be the inner bearing once it's been filed. Step 2 is making the inner bearing. Step 2A is filing the inner bearing. Step 3 is attaching that bearing to the outer wall. Step 4 is soldering the combination to the back plate, which is really the back side of the front plate. And then step 5 is going to be cutting away and continuing the angle. And then we can finally set it. There's a bit of burring in there to finish it up, depending on the angle you've got. So again, the pictures describe some of it. I ended up giving myself a little bit more drawing and notes on that, just to make sure that I understood the order of operations a little better than what he describes in there. These 2 steps these steps are all about either of the versions of setting that are shown on page 83. So what is hard to remember is that you're working backwards in this, and that our outer wall is either the bottom of it, what becomes the bottom of it, which is normally the top of it, is going to either have some kind of castellation or filing away, just like we did when we were doing the steep angle, or it's going to have a ring that we're bending things around, or both. Okay. So he's showing us 2 different settings. You can either castellate and then just fold, because now you've got enough metal out of the way that they can fold to the 90 degrees that they'll need on the back of your stone. Or you can do a little bit of each and make a ring that it's going to roll over as you set, giving it something to push against. So both of those images start the same way as seen on the bottom of page 82. Was that enough with me so far on all that? That's a
Totally
lot.
confusing. I'm sorry.
It is. Okay, so let me draw this one a little bit more, because I think that may help.
Because I see the photos on page 82.
Yeah.
And then I understand what you're saying when you say the ring, because the photos on page 83 seem to be clear to me.
Yeah.
But
So
the process
83
on 82 doesn't.
Right. So that's because 82 and 83 are upside down of one another. So if you take the drawing on 82 and flip it, then it's pointing the right direction for us to do what's on page 83.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the tricky part on this, is we've been building our bezels right side up. Now we're building them upside down in order to flip them right side up in order to set them upside down. It's a little chaotic, right? So our normal bezels, our normal step bezels consist of this, right? When we're framing it out. Sometimes we attach that to a back plate and our stone, whether it's a cab or something else, sits like that, right? That's normal. what we're doing here is we're building an angle so that instead of our cab going that way, it's going this way. Right? So we're going to have to cut through what is normally our back plate to continue the angle that we're supporting it with. Right? So when we actually show it to somebody, it's going to be pointing this way, hopefully a little bit more through the material than that. So more like this, right? So this is what's facing our people that are looking at our piece of jewelry. This is the facing outward. And this is all the thing that we use to set it from behind. So this is against our skin. Okay. I'm going to draw that series again because that is the essence of this and it's important to get. So normal stone, we've made a step bezel for because we are counting on the stone sitting this way, right? It goes on our pendant and we set it like that, right? We're pushing down against the stone to set it. So this is all facing somebody who's looking at our piece of jewelry. This setting is designed to flip this on its head. And we're still going to be doing some setting at the end, but in this case, we're turning the stone upside down and having it poke out the other side. This is where our people are watching from. There's my people watching us. Lovely. It's lovely. It's wonderful. They love it. Right. So this is the stone sticking out and we don't see any of the setting. That's what's cool about this is because this whole setting is hidden behind the piece. But what happens if we don't do anything else is this stone is just going to fall right out. Right. So just like with our other setting, we need to push this wall down, this same bezel wall that we would have been setting if we were setting our stone the normal way. We need to push it down. But we're now pushing down against a flat surface. When we're pushing down against a curve, it's good. It's easy. We can fold it. It hits the stone wall. We're done, right? But this one, it's going to go nowhere. It's going to, like, we can't just squish all of our metal flat all of a sudden unless we either carve pieces away. So that's that floral thing that he's showing in one of his drawings. This is a top view of the flat of the stone that we're pushing down because we've cut away. That looks really obscene, but we've cut away enough that we can push the metal down so that it becomes flat, right? And it holds the stone from the back, pushing it against the curve that we're about to make that fits it nicely. So that's option one. Option two is we stash a little ring of metal in here, and then we push the material over the ring. That gives us a little bit more curvature to hold things against. In that case, we're going to have the ring set in here, just inside. And then our metal, again, we probably still need to cut a little bit away, but we may not need to cut as much away, is going to push down over it. Okay. So all of that is a matter of forcing the stone past what normally would be a back plate, but now is the back side of our decorative elements. Maybe we've set a couple regular faceted stones out front or whatever. We've maybe got some decorative elements out here, but whatever it is, this is what's facing the customer or facing the person looking at our customer. So these reverse settings get tricky because, again, the last thing we do is setting that stone. We can't do soldering and stuff in here. So all of our mechanisms to hold it in place have to sort of just be fitted in. So this ring can't get soldered in on top of the stone. We have to make it fit well so that when we push metal around it, it stays. Does that make a little more sense, gang?
So
Yeah.
when you
Mhm.
push the stone in
Yep.
to the bezel through the back plate, then you put the ring on top of the widest part of the stone, and
Bingo.
then you push.
Yep.
Ah,
Yep. So we're pushing, it's basically, if you've ever set like an off-center turquoise or something and you put a little ring underneath it to help balance it, or a scrap of metal, that becomes the support. It's that kind of a support. We're just putting this ring in as something over which the metal can fold, because it's easier than making metal do, oops, I'm not in screen. Where am I on screen? It's easier than making it do a right angle fold. Right? So it gives it a curve to fold over. I keep going out of screen. There we go. A curve to fold over the wire that's in there, as opposed to a 90-degree fold. He's given us both versions. Just know that with the 90-degree fold version, just like when we were doing our conical setting, we need to cut away material so that it's compressing somewhere. It's closing in. It could be just saw cuts to give it a zigzag. It could be textural, but again, this is going to be behind the scenes and hidden, and we don't want it catching on fabric. So it's got to be something that won't scratch or irritate the skin if it's up against skin, that kind of thing. So he's given us two versions to set, but both of them start with what he's showing us on the bottom of page 82. How are people feeling about that concept?
That's
Making
better.
Much better? Okay, good.
Yep.
All right, so any other questions before I dig into this one?
Well, what I realize is it can't fall out because the bottom part is big and what is protruding is smaller.
Yes, it won't fall out forward, but if you don't
Yeah.
set your stone solidly enough from behind, it can still fall out. It's trickier to get that final setting from the back, simply because it's at an angle, it's going against a flat surface that's really, flush. And so it's got to be a lot snugger, or you're going to have to cut material away or whatever. So it's, to my mind, it looks a little messier than a traditional setting when you look from behind, which is all the more reason to give a little decorative lace, frill along the edge or something that's very intentional. But it gives you so many options. There's some really great pieces where people they have an eye cabochon, a glass eye, and you can protrude it from a really beautifully formed something so that it doesn't have, you don't see the setting. All you see is the background eye, or a beautiful piece of glass. I've seen a lot of people use this setting with glass cabs. It can be done with faceted stones. It's just a little more finicky. So I would say your first one, start with a high domed cab to get the best impact, or a conical, or the conical. Yeah, you could do a conical on this. Yeah, it can work with unusual shapes too, but start with something a little more traditional. And I was going to put this in, I was going to use a high domed bullet for this one so that you can really see it when it's sticking out. You make all kinds of little spikes. This could be a, modern day take on punk jewelry with the spikes. And so I'm going to start again by doing a basic outer wall. And I decided, after reading what he had said about this, that I was going to use a moderately thin outer wall, but he explicitly says our inner wall and our back plate should be heavier. Well, he explicitly says our inner wall should be heavier. I extrapolated that the outer wall should be as well. So I'm using a 22 gauge outer wall for my demo. And I'm using a 16 gauge square wire, which is what he recommended. By the way, oops, I'm on the wrong screen, sorry. By the way, if you don't have square wire and you don't have square rollers, just remember you can make square wire by rolling your regular flat mill, round wire rolled flat 2 directions. You may have to run it through a few passes, but you can make essentially square wire. It'll just have slightly curved corners, just by carefully rolling and measuring back and forth in your mill. Or you can draw plate it if you have a square draw plate. Lots of ways to make it if you don't have the right size. So we're going to do 22 gauge outer wall. And proportion wise, this is another one where you have to think about how much you want poking through the surface. Okay. And how much you need hanging over the edge in order to set it. So let me draw this one too. If my bullet I've got a bullet shaped like this right now, I need some material below the ocean, basically, that's going to hold it in place when we fold it over. And I need enough material
You're
to
a
get,
little bit out.
yep,
of the-
sorry.
That's better. Thank you.
Yep. So I need enough material below the ocean that I'll be able to either fold it over the wire ring that we're going to make, or I'll be able to shape it and fold it flat. Okay. So that part has to be below. And this part still has the basic goal of needs to hold it in place, except that we're also going to be adding some triangle stuff with our inner frame. So it just needs to give me enough room that I have a position to get on that curvature. If you've got a lower dome than what I'm working with, you're still going to have the outer wall and then the triangle part that we're going to be shaping to fit it. And then we're also going to be having whatever we're attaching it to, right? Which is going to follow that path of the angle. So think about your proportions and make sure you're not hiding too much of your stone, because then it kind of defeats the purpose. If I've covered half my stone up just setting it, then I don't have a lot of exciting visual impact from having it stick through. It's one of the reasons I went for this taller dome. So I'm going to go on this one. I'm going to look at, give myself a little bit more than that. I'm going to give myself about 1 centimeter's worth of material on my outer wall. I may need to trim some of that away when I'm done.
What gauge is your metal?
The outer wall, I'm choosing 22. He doesn't specify, but the reason I've chosen 22 is that I know this is the material I'm going to have to fold over at either the 90-degree angle or over the wire. So I don't want it something terribly heavy. He explicitly tells us that our inside ring should be at least 16 gauge square wire. So I'm starting with 22 gauge outer, 16 gauge inner, and assuming a 16 gauge back plate, or what will become the front plate. I suspect we could get away with slightly thinner on that front plate. But the way that he's described his angles and measures, he's counting on that thickness, that sheet, as part of the final hold the stone in place angle. Because what he's told us is that our our part 2, the square wire ring, is supposed to be the inner edge of the bearing must be filed to the same angle. Sorry, that's not far enough. It's very important that the inner bearing match the stone's base exactly in both shape and outer dimension. So we're making a ring on part 2 that is just the size of the back of the stone, not outside the stone, just the size of the stone. So he's counting on the additional material to hold it in place. Okay, once again, yes, it would be nice to have the nanos, but since I don't, I'm going to be hand shaping this to start. That's way big. Yes, that's way big. Still too big. Cut that down a little bit. And take a smidge more off of that. Rather have to stretch it than to cut it back down. So again, this is a snugly fit to the outside wall. And the height accounts for a portion of it sticking out onto the stone and a portion of it below the bottom of the stone that will be used to close the bezel. So some of it is taking the stone itself as it pushes through. This is going to need stretching, so I may have made it too small, but we'll see once I round it up. Okay, let's get this soldered. As a reminder, John encourages us to use hard solder for as many of the steps as we possibly can. He likes to leave easy solder for attaching bezels to things, because then they can be more easily repaired, and only uses the medium when he absolutely has to. It's a little heavy on the solder there, but it'll do. Okay, back to round this baby out. There is my little bezel. There we go. Check and see how this fits. It's a little small. I want to stretch this out a bit. Oops, not the stone, bezel. As a reminder, when you're stretching down a taper, you always want to flip if you're trying for a conical setting, or certainly for a basic shape setting.
You're out of camera, Rachel.
Oh, am I? Sorry, I'm on the wrong screen. Sorry, I've been sitting here shaping my bezel. Okay, so all I'm doing is sizing the stone setting up so that it just passes through. And that looks pretty good. So I have my outer ring. I'm going to sand it to get it cleanly. I've got too many tools on my bench, as if that's even possible. Yep, the small things always want to fall. There we go. And I'm doing both sides at once because as soon as we start putting the components together, it becomes a little harder to get an even size. One side is a little rougher than the other. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Once again, I'm going to take my crossing file, which I managed to lose again. Where did I put it? Where did I put it? And clean up the inside, the chatter from the cuts. Just so I have a nice clean surface to work with. And then an outside cleanup as well, the little bits. So I suspect you could even get away with less than 22 gauge on this particular setting. It probably depends on the size of the stone you're working with. The bigger you go, you probably want a little bit more material. And this is another one that in theory you can do in not round stones, but it's going to be a lot harder to get your inner angles exactly the way you want them. So while I was traveling, I happened across a gem show that I hadn't been to in a while at one of the schools I was visiting, and found a really interesting bullet that's got hexagonal faceting on like sides. So it's not just a round bullet. And I'm looking forward to trying to set that one. There's one, I have one that's 4-sided and one that's 6-sided. Okay, so I've now got a clean fit for that. And I'm going to work on the inside ring that, according to his directions, should be made out of at least 16 gauge sheet or wire for the bearing. And in his descriptions down on the pictures, he says start with square wire. So he doesn't say it in the body of the text, but note that down on that left-hand set of drawings, he marks it as being better to start with square wire. So I am using 16 gauge square wire, dropping my files all over the place. And I'm going to make a ring that is just the size of the base of the stone, not outside of the stone, but inside of the stone. It's a little trickier with square wire to get it to stay flat, but you want to make sure that your wire is in fact staying squared up to itself, meaning don't let it twist on you. Worst case, we'll flatten it out a little bit in a moment. Way too big still. I suppose you could also flatten a jump ring to get this if you have a 16 gauge jump ring. Too big. And what's going to be intriguing to me is how do we get the filed angle that we need on this? Because it may be that we have to file it before we turn it into a jump ring in order to get the best angle. I'm going to try it this way and see. This, I'm going to use snips to get a little cleaner.
Could you use a setting burr to get that?
To get the seat.
Yeah.
So he describes actually cleaning up a little bit of it using a setting burr. I think that if you were going to use a setting burr, you'd need to start with much heavier gauge, and it would also depend on the angle of your stone.
Right.
In my case, I'm not going to find it. Yeah, I'm not going to find a setting burr because those are usually 45 or 90. I mean, 45 or
yeah, they're for faceted.
yeah.
Well, it's okay.
So I think that the answer is it would get you only so far.
Right.
So let's see if that's going to be about right. That looks pretty darn close. And this should fit inside, but just. So yeah, so again, just like when we were making our other step bezels, this is going to need to be a snug fit. So I'm going to make it a little small and then stretch it to be tight in the setting. Get better closure than that though. And once again, I'm using hard solder on this over at the bench. Go. Right, so we have a basic square wire jump ring. Gonna flatten this out. Dig down to my bench block. I think this one may require a little piece of tape. Just want to flatten it out a little bit more. It's nice and square. Tape out of there though. See how that fits. Ever so slightly too big now that I've neatly flattened it. See if that's going to actually true up. It's so close to fitting that I think, oh, I didn't round it. That's why it's not fitting. Hang on. Should have rounded it before I flattened it. There it is. See how that fits now. Oop, still a smidge too big. Okay, so I'm going to cut it, take a little bit away, and re-solder. Solder line. Take a little bit more than that. Okay. This is a hard solder. Yep, missed. Okay, it's opening up, so I gotta close it back a little bit. That's what happens when I don't do the far side first. It's beyond open. This jump ring is going to be half solder. Okay. Take 2. All right, back onto the mandrel to make sure it's nice and round again. That's looking pretty snug in there. So if I do, yep. So that'll be a nice clean fit, but here's the trick. I now need to get the angle cut into it that's going to let this stone come all the way through. And right now it barely pokes through, right? So I've got my square wire and I'm going to take it out of this setting right now. And this is where we discovered together whether I should have filed the angle first, possibly, or whether I can do a filing on it using my crossing file to get a fair amount taken away. I think I probably need a round file. This is so small. That round file, I think. Baby crossing file, see if that does the trick. I'm going to actually put this in ring mandrel to give myself a little grip. I mean, a ring clamp. I said ring mandrel, but I meant ring clamp. Let's see if I can get an angle. I'm going to work only on one side. Rather, I'm only trying to angle it from one side. So I need to make sure I'm always aware of the angle that I'm trying to cut in, even if I'm coming at it from both sides. Yeah, I can tell already that this would probably be better done flat and filed to the angle, because this is fiddly. So there's no one angle that I can tell you to file this to because it's based entirely on the curvature of your stone. Our goal is to emulate the wall, the curvature of the wall at the point at which the stone is going to pass through. And the drawings imply that we're taking away almost all of the material from one edge of the square wire at least. So it's going to become a very, very thin little jump ring once it's finished. Rotate this around, other side, see what we're doing. So again, make sure you're only filing the angle from one side of the material, because the other side is what's going to support it all. I suppose that you might be able to start this with triangle wire too, if you have some. It's just not a terribly common wire format for people to keep on hand.
I was just thinking the same thing because I have a ton of triangle wire and
Nice. Yeah, it's used in a lot of Southwestern designs, but otherwise I don't see many people playing with it. Is that what you're using it for?
no, I use it for all kinds of things. You know, I'll stamp. I tend to use the thicker stuff, but I do have the thin stuff. The thicker stuff, I do bracelets and things.
Oh,
I
nice.
guess
Yeah.
they're Southwestern style, but it's not like Southwestern motifs. I've done music ones and
Nice.
you know, things like that. So,
Yep. Now that you mention it, I have seen it used heavy gauge in
yeah.
bracelet and cuff making a lot. Okay, so I'm not sure if it's going to show you guys, but what I'm doing is taking away at an angle. Is that in focus, or do I need to go to the other camera? Let me go to the other camera. That's not going to show terribly well. Still not, but let me see if I can zoom in further. There we go. That shows a little bit. So what you can hopefully see a little bit is that I'm taking away at an angle into just the top of this jump ring. So I'm peeling away so that as I get further into it, let me grab the stone. As I get further into it, my stone is going to go more and more up through, more and more through the hole. But I am a long ways away from close, from what I want to be. I want to be somewhere up there when I'm pushing through. So I've got a ton of material to take away, which is making me wonder why John wants us using 16 gauge instead of starting thinner. I think it's probably, this is another one of those, maybe the ones he was doing as his samples were using a larger stone than I'm using. And therefore it maybe makes sense to have it be a heavier gauge wire. So we're going to keep chipping away. So while I'm sitting here filing, let me tell you about the next class that I'm teaching, which is a weekend, a 3-day workshop in 2 weeks on hollow forms, which is one of my absolute favorite structural things to do with metal. And if you have started making bezels, it's not a far cry to move on to hollow forms. They're a great way to add a lot of dimension to your designs without a whole lot of weight. And you can add settings to them. You can use them in clasp making. They're a stepping stone to making boxes, which is another thing I love. And it's done virtually like this one is, except instead of me just showing you what I'm doing, you get stretches of time where you go to your bench and work on things and come back and share what you've learned. And I stay on camera and available while you're doing that, so you can ask questions. And we cover pendants, and if people are interested, we cover some bead techniques, bead making and ring making techniques. And it really opens up a lot of doors. That is available for registration. And we do have a few spots left. So if you're interested, check it out.
I can't wait.
Rachel,
Yeah, I'm thinking more and more that these proportions are not quite what we want them to be for this stone. Because this is a lot to take away. I think. Tell me I didn't just drop the carefully moderated jump ring. There we go. So it's getting more towards the angle I need, but it's not wide enough. So I got to take some material out. I think 16 gauge is too heavy for this size stone. And I'm debating whether it's going to be faster. I think it's going to be faster for me to start with a thinner gauge wire than this and work it out. Because I'm going to be here forever if I have to trim that down to just a fine little ring. Although I don't know who said it because I wasn't looking at the screen, but we could potentially drill this out to get a better angle. If we knew that our stone was going to follow that angle, but I'm a third of the way through where I need to be on this. I'm going to step back and see what other gauges of square wire I have. While I'm doing that, any questions? Or any on this project or any of the others we've done thus far?
I have a separate question. Where are you teaching your hollow forms out of?
That's a virtual class. That's a live.
From you?
On camera. Pardon?
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
via Zoom. So it's 3 days. You work in your own studio, which is hopefully very comfortable for you. Yeah.
I've been looking at your Metalworks, the class you're going to be doing. So I
That's
will look
virtual
up the-
too.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sure. And that one, unfortunately, they realized they only wanted a 2-day, so I'm going to have to cram a little bit more into that one and more in 2 days than I would normally do. And it means I couldn't do one of the fancier projects that I wanted to try, but
Okay, well, I'll check your website because I'm not very social, so I don't do a lot of social media stuff.
yeah, the website
right.
definitely has registration for all of them except the Metalworks class. You have to register at
Right.
Metalworks website.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Sure. I do not have a thinner gauge, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to
Couldn't you use a sanding mandrel on your Fordham? You know, the sanding mandrel that you use on an inside ring or
Yeah,
inside ring?
Usually, I don't know if I have one small enough. This is an itty bitty little.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
but you make a good point. I might be able to take material away with.
And also, how about a grinding? Do you have any of those shaped grinding tips?
Yeah, what the bigger concern is I have too much material around it's too thick of a wall. So I need to take it down, but I might be able to use a barrel burr once it's inside. Should we try that? Shall I solder it in and then do the rest of the cleanup while it's in place? I'm game to try.
We're not going.
Sounds good.
It's an experiment. What the heck? Okay, so what I'm doing now then is let me make sure I'm not screwing myself up by doing this. So we're putting it at flush to one end or the other of the walls that we've made. And we're going to solder it in with hard solder. Again, notice that this would be hard. I'd have to drop it from a height to get it to fall out. Again, something hard. You want this a snug fit. This is unlike our step bezels in the earlier sessions. This is a little less concerning if you get solder flowing in because we're filing material away no matter what we do. So I'm going to do a hard solder on this over at the bench. We'll see if I can drill out the excess. I don't know that I'm going to easily be able to get my angle once it's in there, but we're going to find out together. So normal little fluxing action. And oops, I need to cut some more hard solder. Again, even though we did the outer parts with hard solder, based on John's recommendation, we're going to try and do everything we can with the hard solder. Remember that each time you flow solder, a little bit of what makes it flow is burning off, the zinc and such. And so it's ever so slightly harder to reflow the next time you do it. And that is what he's counting on by having us use hard solder for more than one application. If you spend too long on the torch, it'll all open up. But in this case, we're trying to be in quickly. Just like that. So got a little bit of an opening up on my ring that I could probably fill with solder, which I think I'll probably do just to give myself a more stable base. And that all that means to me is that I didn't have it as tight as I should have. It was ever so slightly too small a ring, even though it didn't seem to be because it was jammed in there so snugly. So I'm cheating and filling that little tiny bit of a gap with hard solder. And when I positioned it, I did make sure that the angle I had been filing, oops, I'm not in screen. The angle I had been filing is on the inside so that I have less work to keep going. Right, so I'm going to pop back over and let's see what we can do with a barrel burr down the middle. I think I want to hold this in my ring clamp just so my fingers, oops, my fingers are not at risk. This one's probably a little heavier for that.
You need them for the show.
I do. Much to do at that show. Let's see if I can hold it there without squishing it too badly. Okay, let's see what we've got for good sized barrel burrs. Might as well go big. See what we can get. Stay nearly the same size barrel burr as our hold. Barrel burrs are one of those things that you don't need them very often, but boy, when you need them, they're exactly what you need. X the heck out of that and get my goggles. Now I'm going to try and hold this in a position that you guys can see, but it's not the most conducive to me being able to see when I'm doing this. So let's see what I can get. Is that in screen for you guys? Ish. So all I'm doing is rotating around the inside of the hole with the barrel burr. Doing a bit. Let's see how it's looking for our stone. Okay, we still got a long way to go. So put that back in. I think I'm going to actually go from both sides a little bit, just so that I'm cutting evenly. So it can be a little bit out of view for you guys. I apologize. So I'm supporting the majority of the tool against my thumb to give it a little bit more control. Getting some. Starting to get through there. There's really going to be almost nothing left.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make much sense, does it?
No.
I'm wondering what I'm misunderstanding in his direction, or whether there's a sizing, whether it really is that he was working so much larger. Because I could see a 16 gauge wall being useful on a heavy stone, a good sized stone. But this little guy, either due to the steepness of the cone or something else. So we're getting there. I'm pretty much going to have to take all but the last little bit of this away. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be off screen just because I need to hold it close enough to see. Ugh, it's getting really messy. I think I need to work with a file to clean this up a bit more. Yeah, we're starting to get some traction, but I need to get a lot more material out of the way. So let me do a little more cleanup with the files. And this may be one that I'll have to do a second pass at with a larger stone if I can find a good sized bullet or a high dome cab.
Do you think that the ring should have been bigger, inner
Well,
diameter?
Outer diameter, certainly not, because it has to fit inside the
Oh,
definite ring, right?
yeah.
What I'm thinking is either for the scale I'm working at, it needed to be a thinner gauge. Or, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine much where it's really just that we need just barely enough lip, or my stone is too steep for the kind of setting that he's describing here. Because really, my stone almost needs to go all the way through in order to do anything. So it's barely got an extra lip by the time we're done with this. Which means there's not a lot of material for me to angle either, because I'm now filing away almost every bit of the angle that I put into it before I put it in place. So we may be back to that idea of trying a setting burr to get the last of it just where we want it. I just don't think I have a setting burr that's got a steep enough angle either. Hey, still going.
Would any kind of bud burr work or something?
Bud burr might actually follow this curve really, really well. That's a great call. Let me see if I've got a big enough one. I tend to only keep a few bud burrs in stock. That is a good call out for this angle.
Yeah, I never use them, so, yeah, but I thought, maybe this would be something.
Yeah. I don't even know where my bud burrs are. They're also called flame burrs, if you guys haven't heard of bud burr. Sometimes that's what they're referred to as. Where the heck do I have my one or two that I own of that style? Oh, there's one. That is way too small, I think. Yep, way too small. I may not have anything close. I may even have a hard time finding the right size setting burr. Let's see. Too big by a lot. I think I may need to up my burr game. They're just so expensive these days. Sorry, gang, bear with me as I go poking through the burr collection. Let's see. And I have everything but I need. Too small. Leaps up to too big. Ooh, I have a conical burr. Let's see. Nope, also too small. Yeah, I think I'm out of luck when it comes to good burrs for this situation. So let's see, I'll give it a little bit more time files. And then if this doesn't seem like it's going to get us anywhere, I may say we back down from this one and try it again when I can find a larger stone. I would hate to have to do that because I'm looking forward to setting next week. But let's see what we get with a little more filing.
Do you have any small Riffler files? Would that work?
I do, but I don't think they're going to give me an angle that's good enough for it.
Oh, okay.
Because the problem is we need the angle
getting the
on the
angle.
inside,
Right.
but narrow enough around the outer edge. It's basically we're creating a teeny tiny bit of a lip for this. And I may have just chosen a bad stone proportion for this project because he shows it with more of a domed cab than a true bullet. let's see, getting a little skinnier here. Oh, we're getting closer. We're seeing, I've got past the end of the wall. So maybe a few more moments on this and see what we get. I know watching somebody else file is like watching paint dry, but some of what we need to do to get it done.
Well, it brings it home about how long it takes, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, if you watch somebody do a video of it sped up, and then
Mhm.
you're doing it and you're like, why is this taking so long? Oh my God. And of course it's because
Yeah,
that's
what am
just
I
how
doing
it
wrong?
takes. Yeah. But it's
Yep.
not you, it's them. And it
It's the
just,
process, yeah. Good point. Rinse this off because it's now a little caked in dust. Let's see what we've got.
That's what's so good about this series, because you see it in real time. And so you realize that you're not going to sit down and in 10 minutes have a completed setting and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
It
and some
took
of
me
these
2
are much
days.
faster settings than others. For sure. So there is really almost nothing left of this bezel, but I'm going to start trying to get an angle as I go onto the inside just to re-angle. I'm trying to sort of leave the outer ring, but not much of it. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this one I should try angling the wire before I make the jump ring the next time. I think that's going to be a lot easier than this crazy amount of fit and file. It's amazing the number of steps we have to do that are like just tedious repetition things in order to get to all the fun design and build and finished products.
Exactly.
Filing,
It's,
soldering,
agree.
sanding. Yeah.
that
it's
must
like
be why
going
people
shopping. I'm
turn,
sorry.
go ahead.
It's like going grocery shopping and you just want the meal to be cooked.
It must be why people turn designer, right? So
Yeah.
they just design it and then they leave the
Somebody else.
tedious. Yeah.
Yeah. That annoys the heck out of me. Learn how to make stuff if you're going to design. You'll make better designs. Okay, so we are getting some headway
Yeah.
and could ostensibly set this with the amount we've got. But I think I want it a little deeper in to the setting. It's still not really following the angle of the stone. I'm going to give it another whirl.
Okay, what do you have left of the 16 gauge ring?
Like fingernails thickness is what I've got left. It's just a little weird. I'm going to actually try filing from the other side, see if I can get that cleaner. There's almost nothing here to hold the stone, but because the curvature is so steep, it's holding the stone because it's just ever so slightly narrowing at the end that's going to be sticking out.
Okay.
Basically, I'm building a tube that I've compressed by putting that smidge of extra metal in. So you guys can see it's starting to stick through, but it's not a very clean fit. It's a little wobbly in there. I'd want the angles to match better than I have them right now. And I'm not quite sure whether there's any tools that I have that will do that trick for me once it's in place, because that's why he seems to imply in the notes and the pictures that we need to have made this angle before we put it in, which makes a lot of sense to me. So we're trying to fake it out a little bit. But there's like yeah, there's a 1/10 of a millimeter of material left, maybe, from the outer wall. I'm going to re-round this now because I think part of my problem is that it's losing shape from me having it in the bench pin, in the ring clamp. So let me try a little bit of rounding and see whether that improves things. Screen keeps popping out on me. Am I still there for you guys?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ah, much better when it's rounded. Oop. It's too much better. It goes straight through, gang.
Oh, no.
Well, it's a little unclear. Maybe it only goes through if I angle it a bit. Yeah, okay. No, actually, I think we may have lucked upon exactly what John wants us to do in the sizing, because we still have to put this on its back plate and cut away the material of the back plate. So this was when I first started talking about the dimensions back on, this may actually be perfect happenstance. Back on page 82, when he talks about it being very important that the inner bearing match the stone's base dimension exactly in both shape and outer dimension. And then further along, when after we filed it to the angle, when the bearing drops easily over the stone, the bezel and bearing can be soldered together. So we've pre-soldered them, but it drops easily over the stone now. And then it's assembled to the back side of the workpiece. The back side of the workpiece is going to make the difference and save us here, gang. Look at the drawing that he's done on the right-hand bottom of 82, where he's showing the dashes, the second little bridge looking picture down, and he shows dashes of where we're going to be cutting away. So we're adding in, at this point, I'm going to do a 16 gauge back plate. I'm sort of debating whether I should stick with the 16 gauge, but we're going to create a back plate. Then filing that, we're going to meet up with the angle that we've just cut, continuing the angle. So that little bit more, the 1/2 millimeter or whatever it is on 16 gauge, 3/4 of a millimeter, is going to add just enough grip to hold our stone in place from this just barely sliding through. It's going to then sort of stop it at that wall. So I think I'm going to show this to you guys up on full screen. I think by having it be just hanging there, so that if I were to jiggle it too much, I could probably get it to pull through, or if I pull it, I can pull it through. As soon as we put that back plate, which will become our front plate, in place, there's going to be enough material to hold it. So I think somehow with the filing, I've managed to luck on the right sizing for this, and I'm going to keep going. Does that make any sense at all? I'm going to put a back plate on top of what I just built, and it's going to make the extra angle.
Yes, makes sense.
Okay, so we're going to pretend my 16 gauge material is a beautiful pendant that I am putting my stone through, because I don't have anything made up for this to go into. I'm just going to, actually what I'll do is I'll go quickly punch out a bit of 16 gauge, which means I need to anneal this. No, I don't need to anneal this. I'm in good shape on that. Bear with me, I'm going to run over to my circle punch and punch it out. It's gonna, if I have the muscles in me to do a 16 gauge punch today, we'll see. Good. You hear all the fun noises, even if you can't see me on screen. Give me just a moment. We're going to hear a lot of loud banging. And I'll be right back with you if I can figure out where I put my wax. Voila, a pendant, unlike any pendant ever before that we're gonna put our stone through. All right, so I have my fancy, this would be the front, I'd put any decorative elements on it, component. And
Did you
I
do that with a
have,
hammer?
pardon?
Did you do that with a hammer?
Yeah, it with a brass mallet.
16 gauge, that's pretty thick, so
Yeah,
okay, just
it's a
checking.
little thicker than recommended for the Durston circle cutter.
Well, usually, some people use a hydraulic press or something, but
Yeah.
it's good to know it can do it.
Yeah, it's probably not terribly healthy for the edges of your cutters. So I can't say that I recommend what I just did.
Well,
But-
swear us to secrecy, we'll do it.
So this is going to be, I'm going to actually mark this with the front, even though it's going to burn off in a moment. So this is going to be my front, right? So my stone is going to come poking through the front. And the piece that I've made, I need to attach so that the small base we've just been filing is what's connecting to the back, right? So let me draw that sequence for you guys, just to make sure that's clear, because this is the important part for this style. There's my little eraser paper. There we go. So we have, where the pens go? We have built a piece right now that is the walls plus an itty bitty little angle bit, right? Going all the way around. And so this has a little ring of metal inside of it that's going across the wall. We also have our actual piece that we're going to be designing. This would be the front. There'd be all kinds of decorative, whatever, but our stone is designed to come through from the back to the front. Okay, so I need to solder this segment on, not this segment. That's the important part, because these pieces here are going to be what closes the stone in. We're going to be setting from the back side. Okay, so my stone will ultimately come through from here. It'll actually be stuffed in from behind. And it'll hit my angled bits. I should do this in 2 colors so you can actually see it. The stone will hit the angled pieces and get stuck there, because we're gonna, as soon as we do this angled file, it's gonna meet up with that one and continue the angle so that it's holding it in snugly. All fairly clear?
So I have a question.
Yep.
Do you really need the inner angled ring then if you're putting the back plate? Because the skiff of metal from the back plate, isn't that enough to hold it in?
The answer is depends on the thickness of, could you get away with just a back plate? My guess is yes, if this is thick enough, because we have to have enough material to give a consequential angle that equates to, right? When we set a stone the normal way, when we're doing this, we need enough that it equates to the amount of grab that we have when we're setting it down the normal way, right? So from there to there is what we need covered.
Because we're not actually going to push down the base plate like you would a flush setting or something, right?
We're pushing down from here and it's counting on the force of pressure to hold it against the angle that we've made, which is why when we set the stones the normal way, upright, we can just leave it resting because we're building that angle by the pressure we push down. But in the upside down version, we have to cut the angle in because it's counting on fitting.
We don't see where you're drawing.
Oh, sorry, I'm drawing below the, sorry, let me redraw that one. So when we're,
the horizon.
When we're doing the upright, you know, the normal version, we count on our stone having its curvature pushed against by a fold over, but we don't have any pressure coming in from these when we have it flipped upside down. So we're building the natural channel for it by making that little angle that we're building, which is going to be of multiple parts. It's going to be Some of it is what we've built in the extra frame, the little part inside, and some of it, the last bit of it, follows the curve to hold it snugly. So then all we're doing is downward pressure from above, well, from behind, to push it in against that angle. So my take is that, in answer to your original question, potentially if this were a very heavy walled piece, you'd have enough thickness, depending on the height of your stone and the curvature of your stone, to hold it in with just that. But if you think about it, that leaves a piece of your stone hanging out
Unsupported.
without support, right?
Yeah.
And so potentially the pressure down would chip these corners,
Ah.
right? What we're doing is making a little cradle, in essence, to hold the support of the stone all the way along.
Yeah, when John's talking about in the picture on the bottom right on page 82,
Yep.
he says the angle filed here, meaning the back into the back plate,
Yep.
will match the angle already filed into the thickening
Right.
rim,
Right.
and check the stone frequently. So
So-
yeah, it's a continuation.
Yeah, it's going off of that. And that's the part that makes me understand when he says, over on the text, it's very important that the inner bearing match the stone's base exactly. That is counting on the fact that this ending point is going to hit at the corners of the stones, and that this is there to keep holding it in place, because otherwise it's going to slide past, which is what we're seeing when we get really close to the edge of our filing. So this one, if you're not putting this stone into something, you can't count on that excess, and you would need to make your ring a little more snug than described. Okay, so we've got the front of our piece, the back of our piece, and the extra lip on this teeny tiny little lip we've got here. This is the lip side that I'm going to put down to what is now becoming the back of this setting. Okay, so I'm going to go solder that whole unit down, and then we're going to have some drilling and some sawing. Zoom back out a little bit, because that's like the surface of the moon right now. There we go. Okay, and in a perfect world, I'd line this all up neatly, right smack dab in the middle. Actually, in a perfect world, I would use my punch and punch out the circle that I know I soon need to cut into this, but I bet I don't have the right size punch. So I'm just gonna ballpark the positioning again for the sake of this sample piece. I now have multiple sets of goggles on my head because I keep moving from bench to bench. Trim it back. And once again, if we can, we're doing this with hard solder. And keeping in mind that I'm using 16 gauge on the base, this is going to be tricky to get the bottom hotter. I could put it up on something. As I've said in other sessions, I am not a fan of using a steel grate if possible. If I can avoid it, I don't, because it steals the heat. So if I can, if it's not too big a differential, I'm going to try and just get away with soldering from the brick. And I'm bouncing my heat underneath as much as I can. I might do something like tuck under a little bit, lift up, if I can do it without moving my stuff out of position, just to get that going. Starting to flow, so it's lifting up a little bit. Get a little more solder. And I'll tell you the truth, if we weren't using John's regimen here, I would probably be using medium solder on this particular soldering exercise. So don't feel badly if you decide to go that route. Okay, so we're soldered down. Looking at the back of our piece now, right? And our stone's gonna poke in through there and come out the other side once we've drilled and filed neatly, following that angle of the filing. So I'm gonna pop over to my drill press briefly, and then I'll be right back with you. Any questions in the meantime? Anyone?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Not necessarily related, but I wanted to ask you, because I saw a couple of the YouTube videos and you talk about the gold prong setting with silver. You talked about the fact that, I mean, in the videos that I've been watching, you mentioned that it's a different flow and that with gold, you just can't flush it. And with
flush
silver,
it.
you can. You just can't flood it.
Yeah. So so silver is more forgiving. Silver will jump a gap a little bit better than gold will. So because of the way that gold transmits heat differently than silver does, it's not going to have the same reaction when you solder. That hang on a second, I gotta position this. It's not gonna behave quite the same way. So helps if I actually take my Chuck key out. Hang on a sec and I'll be right back with you. Just trying to get this drilled. Okay, so gold, and I am not a gold expert by any stretch of the imagination. I can't afford to work with it enough to become as proficient as I am with silver. But if you have even the least little bit of a gap in your seams, on gold, it's not going to flow and fill the way that silver will, because of the way that it transmits heat and the way that it responds. It doesn't spread the heat the way that silver does. It's very focused. So it takes more precision, because what will happen if you have that gapping is you're going to end up melting one side or the other. It's just going to want to curl up on itself. So it's about making sure that everything is cleanly sawed and cleanly filed and nicely squared up. And you're using small bits of solder, much smaller bits of solder than you do with silver, spread out more. So more pieces of smaller size spread across your seam than like just putting one and getting it to follow the seam. It doesn't do quite the same capillary action that you get out of silver. So that's what I was referring to in those probably.
But would you use silver solder or would you use
No.
gold solder?
Well, so the answer is it depends on if I'm soldering gold to silver.
Right.
So if I'm soldering a gold wall down to a silver back plate, I will tend to use a silver solder on the inside to get it to solder down, because it's not really going to be seen and it's cheaper. But if I'm soldering gold to gold, it's absolutely gold, not only gold solder, but also of the carat and color that you are soldering. And also I recommend that you get your gold solder from the same manufacturer you get your gold from, because there's slight variations in their color mix. And so they're going to be matching, and gold is required in the United States to melt out to the carat so that you can't uncarat your material by using a solder. As long as you're using 18 karat solder, it melts back to 18 karat, unlike silver solder, which has a little bit less than the proportions of silver in it. Did that make any sense at all at this hour?
Yeah. I mean, I was just like, I'm thinking future, because I've watched a couple of the videos and I don't work in gold. I can't afford it. But if I have scrap and if I want to make something, I just wanted to have an idea as to how would I use like a little rod of gold with silver, like when you were talking about like bronze setting or something.
Yeah,
Just
my
to be
most
prepared.
My most common use of gold when I first started out, and even still now, I don't do a whole lot in nothing but gold. My most common use was using it as walls on a step bezel. And so I do the outer wall on the step bezel in gold, and then the inner wall, as long as it's not going to show, that's being stuck down to something in silver to save money on that piece. Oops, I'm not showing you guys what I'm doing. Bear with me. So I drilled a hole in the center of my piece, and I'm now rough sawing away the material, leaving plenty of material for my filing activity next. I'm not going right up against the walls like I would if I were cutting away for a piercing or something like that. So I'm really just trying to reduce the amount of material I have to file to the angle. Not doing a very good job of getting much away, so I'm gonna have to do a second pass of this, I think. A little bit. Let's get some more off of this side. There are also a lot of ways to add gold without adding a lot of gold. If you haven't learned Kyumbu, it's one of the simplest ways to add 24 karat gold to your work, and it's really beautiful. There's also something called bimetal, which is a layer that's thicker than a plating. It's a fairly consequential layer of gold, either 14, 18, or 22 karat. I think they may make it in 24, but I'm not positive, on top of a silver or an argentium base. And as long as you don't overheat it, you never want to go above medium solder when you're soldering that down. Then as long as you don't overheat it, it won't flow back into the silver, and it makes a really great, less expensive addition. It's still pretty expensive sheet material.
Mm.
If you like doing Kyumbu, Tevel at Allcraft sells a double thickness Kyumbu foil,
Yeah,
which is really nice because it's
Yeah.
less likely to, get pulled into the silver.
Yep.
It is
and it gives a
expensive.
little more dimension to your Kyumbu. I love his double weight. He has a weight and a half, unless he stopped carrying that. If you want something in between.
I think he stopped that. He used to have a triple weight also, but
Yeah.
he's not doing that.
And if you're
But
doing
you-
it a lot, Jane Redmond teaches a class on rolling your own, which is wonderful.
Right. And if you want to play with gold, it's not high carat, but Rio sells 1, 2, and 3 millimeter discs of 14 karat, and they're not really expensive. You can get a 10 pack of the 2 millimeters for like, I think it's $20 or something.
Cool. And it's not plated, it's actual whole.
No, it's 14 karat.
Nice. So I'm a bit of a gold snob, and to me 14 karat yellow looks a little too brassy. So
Right.
I tend to only work with 18 or 22.
Well,
But
I've only worked with 18, and I've alloyed my own to like 20, and stuff like that. But somebody I know who sells a lot of stuff and wanted some gold in there, used the 14 karat.
nice.
I have a student who's doing a lot of stuff in 9 karat, and I asked her why.
Yeah.
It's like, why bother at that point?
Right. Although there's a lot to, if you do start working in gold as a full, like you're doing everything in gold, there's a whole lot to be learned about the different strength properties. For example, the one set of solid gold rings that I make my ring bands in 14 and then the settings in 18, because 18 is just a little soft for a good band. So it's most people can't really see the yellow difference. I can, because I know it's there, and I can see next to each other that one of them is richer. But the other thing is, when you start to get into the other colors of gold, each of them has very finicky properties of their own. I'm led to understand. I've never worked with white gold, but I'm led to understand that it's one of the most problematic, except for purple gold, which is really, really great.
I've heard that it's pretty hard to work with.
So all I'm
I
doing
had
now, guys-
scrap. I had
Pardon?
scrap, and I melted them into little balls.
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to play around with them.
Yep. There's a lot to be done with it. And it's cool if you can have it, people gift you things that they don't use anymore and say, hey, do something with the ring. The problem is you don't exactly know what carat you got. Because if it had any repairs, it may be less. You know, if they didn't use a gold solder on it, it could be less pure. But you can also just send it back to Rio or someplace else for refining, although Rio added that $50 fee. I need somebody on this call who's going to be on our next session to remind me that I need to post for you guys the Rio for Schools coupon code for anybody who's not already getting Rio for Schools or professional pricing. Because I'm a Rio affiliated teacher, I have a code that I can give you that you can
Oh,
set up.
bummer.
Oh, great.
I just bought a bunch
I-
of silver yesterday.
Pardon?
I said, bummer, I just bought a bunch of silver yesterday.
Well, I can, if you want to wait at the end of the call, I can try and dig it up and post it. I'm not supposed to just post it in my Facebook groups. It's supposed to be given out in classes, which this would qualify for.
Mhm.
And
Maybe in
I can
Messenger. Maybe in Messenger.
try. So yeah, if anybody wants to drop me a note on the Facebook group in direct message to Eclectic Nature Jewelry, then I can paste it to you in there afterwards. I may not be able to find it right off the bat, but I'll try. So gang, what I'm doing here on the bench is I'm just working my my gap back from what I sawed out to close to the rim of the inner ring that we set in the back plate.
Uh-huh.
I just need to take material away with some control because I then am going to have to start angling it to match. And it looks like time-wise, we won't get to our final setting of this chapter. So we'll have to do that next time, and then we'll start our settings. But the final setting is the briolette. So that's going to be a fun one. I've never done a briolette setting. I'm looking forward to it. Let's see. While I'm sitting here sawing, let me make sure that there are no other notes I wanted to give. Yeah, in Messenger, don't give it to me in the Zoom Messenger. Give it to me in back on Facebook or drop me an email and I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. Because then I'll call them in the morning.
Yeah, they might.
I
If you
just
call, they
put a
might.
name.
They might let you just move it over. So next session is going to be the 18th, and we're going to do that the teardrop the briolette setting. Which is the conical cap business. And then we will make sure that we have all the setting tools together and start doing some of our stone setting. And I'm going to work my way through not every setting that we've got, because a lot of them are sort of duplicated, but all the variations. And I'm going to also show the different materials that John talks about. So I've got some of the stuff with Kevlar in it, the name of a Jet Ballistic, and I've got the plaster of Paris and shellac combo. I've got a setting ball to show you how I would set something up in that, which is fairly new to me. I only just recently picked that up. And we're going to use a bunch of the different tools, including some of the ones that we made in the earlier session and some manufactured tools. So if you have stones that you've been holding off on doing, bring them to play along and we'll go from there. So I'm going to be filing for a while. Any other questions while I'm filing?
I think it's time for you to go home. You have a show tomorrow.
Well, I've set up for a show tomorrow. It's getting there. Does anybody have anything to show? That's what I look forward to. Anybody have any show and tell stuff?
I'll wear my earrings.
Yeah. Oh, you finished them so much so that you can show them. Hang on, I want to see these up close. Let me spotlight you. Nice.
They're
That's a
crooked and all,
perfect
but I'm
use
okay.
of this setting.
Let's see. Oh. I can't get the second one in.
Super exciting. That is great
Great.
movement. Fantastic.
Very cool.
Woo!
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very pretty.
What did you use square wire? What's the dangle part?
No, I used tube wire.
Tubes.
Right
Oh,
here.
nice.
Okay, first I used wire.
Lift it up a little. There we go.
First I used wire here. I made
Yeah.
the half round
Yeah.
there, right? I went through, then I put the tube. Then I kind of
Okay.
thought that it was missing something, so I added another bead
Yeah,
and
Very
great.
nice.
Excellent use of that setting.
yeah. So they're both kind of different because I kept on melting the top. You see how it's a little crooked here?
Yeah,
Yeah, well, like
But
they
I
say,
don't
your
care.
head's
I
in the
melted it
middle.
like 3 times.
I wouldn't have
And
known if you hadn't told me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're beautiful.
Nice.
Thank you.
That's actually one of the more interesting uses of this setting that I've seen.
Oh
I
yeah?
like it.
Okay. Good.
Anybody else have something they want to share? Don't all jump at once. My favorite part is seeing what you guys are working on. All right.
I have
And
an
then,
injured shoulder, so
oh,
I barely got that done.
okay. And then after we get through with this, there's going to be chapter 4, which is prong setting, which gets into some really interesting variations. We got a hint of our very first few settings in using the bezel block today, because those are useful in some of the fabricated setting, you know, the sheet fabricated settings of that series. But beyond that, we start to get to work with wire and a whole lot of tiny little solder joins. So if you don't already have your solder cut into small bits or have some of the chip solder that Rio or some of the other places sell, you may want to pick some up. If you're buying from Rio, unfortunately, they only sell it by the like ounce or something absurd. It's a huge amount of chip solder in each thing, and you probably will want both hard and medium. I wouldn't bother getting the chip solder in easy, or you can roll your own. You can roll it out of wire if you only have wire solder right now, and just cut it really, really thin and really tiny chips, because we're soldering each of those joint points on our prong settings when we get to that. And we'll start that, well, not quite start. We'll probably the second session of that chapter, we'll do the modification to the cross-locking tweezers that's so important to that series. I think it'll probably be second session of that chapter 4. So with that in mind, unless you want to sit here and watch me file down to the angle, then that's all I've got for you tonight. This is really literally, I'm just going to file until that hole gives me just barely more angle for this stone to poke through all the way so that I can set it from the back. And then I will either do a ring in advance so that you guys can see it when we get to that setting, or we'll make that part of the setting of this particular stone so that you can see. It's thick enough that we could do either the ring or we could do the castellation style of back setting. That are both of those are page 83 in the book. So those 2 variations. Questions, comments? I will.
So, I'm sorry. So you are gonna do 83, the ones with all the little things on top?
So I can do either. Do you guys have a strong preference? Or I can try to, I don't know that I'll have time to prep another one of these before the next session, but I don't think we'll also get through all the settings in one session. So maybe I can, so I did say I was going to make a list of things that people wanted to see that we didn't get covered. I think there was another setting we talked about earlier that people wished that we could show, like a trillion. I think we were talking about a trillion setting. So maybe that'll be in our catch-up pile during the summer or something, that we set another version of this, because this is a little funky and I'll have to play with it a bit more. And somebody's asking, can I recommend any tools other than the tool I'm using, perhaps not as precise? I'm betting this was back when we were doing the bezel block. If there's other things you can use beside a bezel block. The answer is yes, you can work around a mandrel. You can work around, so there's plumb bobs that you can get in stores. Plumb bobs have a great angle on them, so you can form around that. you can make one by drilling into a hardwood. It won't be as precise, but it'll give you, you can get an angle in there. If you file it out into the angle you want, you can actually control it a little bit more. And then you just need, say, a plumb bob or something to act as the pusher into that space. But if you do that, make sure it's a hardwood and not like a pine or something, because it won't hold the shape. I'm trying to think what other tools I might use. Yeah, I think those are probably the ways I'd go. And again, we're going to learn soon for the briolette, we're going to learn a technique for making a cone so that you can just make your cone instead of doing this forming that we're doing in today's version of it. So those are some variations. I'm going to pop up the usual links in case anybody needs to see how you can go look at the YouTube, or if you want to see the links to the Facebook group or my workshops. So those will go in chat before we leave. And there you go. And let's call it right there, unless there are more questions. All right. Thanks for hanging in, gang.
Thank you. Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Stay
Rachel.
safe.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening. Good show.
Thank you. If you're even close to Portland, Oregon, come on by this weekend and see the gathering of the guilds at the Oregon Convention Center and say hi in person.
Okay, see you soon.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.